WashingTECH.
Hey, it's Joe, and I don't have to tell you, relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you, A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at WashingTECH. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
Support for this podcast has been provided by referrals.internetassociation.org, Internet Association's new job site. IA understands and helps shape policies for its member companies. Collectively, they understand their platforms and services perform better with the perspectives of diverse employees and users who share their experiences. Visit Internet Association's job referral site at referrals.internetassociation.org to view and apply for openings across participating IA member companies. By partnering with leading civil rights organizations, including AnitaB.org, the Bipartisan Congressional HBCU Caucus, the National Urban League, and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, IA's job site is a new resource for historically underrepresented job applicants interested in working in the internet industry. Visit the site today at referrals.internetassociation.org.
Digital divide is not just a problem, but it's a crisis.
Welcome to the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
From Washington, D.C., it's the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
Hey everyone, so here we are on the fateful election day as purveyors of misinformation and intimidation use both traditional and digital tactics to keep voters away from the polls. The backdrop to this, of course, has been the Supreme Court's rollback of the Voting Rights Act, most notably its Shelby Counter v. Holder decision, in which it essentially neutered the VRA's pre-clearance requirement, the provision requiring state and local governments to get federal approval before making changes to their voting laws and practices. Section 5 is still there. The court just ruled the 40-year-old data Congress relied on to decide which states are subject to the requirement were too old. So we've got that. Then we have Lawrence Tribe. He wrote in Lawfare last week that we have the conservative majority of the Supreme Court, with the exception of John Roberts, suggesting state legislatures should be the highest authority in each state when it comes to each state's voting laws, even above the highest state court charged with enforcing each state's constitution. So there's a trend towards that, and now people are trying to figure out what Amy Coney Bryant's going to do. Social media hasn't played as dominant a role in shaping public opinion as it did in 2016, but that doesn't mean state actors and others aren't still using it. And the Washington Post reports bad actors are using robocalls now, in Michigan specifically, to explicitly tell people to stay away from the polls. The FCC empowered carriers a few years ago to block robocalls before they even reach consumers, but apparently they dropped the ball here. And here we are heading into 2021. The New York Times warned the public this morning about potential rigged voting machines, tossed ballots, and intimidating federal agents. Yes, this is 2020. Yes, we are still fighting this battle. In this election, though, the electorate cast their votes by mail in record numbers. So we're seeing this shift across the political spectrum to more analog tactics, either to suppress votes or preserve them. Irrespective of what happens in this year's election, we're going to have these problems and these issues facing us in the next several years ahead. We'll see what happens. I'm tuning it out, at least until tomorrow. I don't think I'm even going to watch the results coming. I'll wake up tomorrow and see what happened. But my guest today is Alejandro Roark, Executive Director of the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership here in Washington, D.C. Previously, Alejandro led LULAC's tech portfolio. He was also the founding executive director of the state of Utah's first and only Mexican cultural arts organization, Alejandro Roark.
Hey, Joe, how's it going?
It's going
Very
well.
happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I mean, there's a lot going on. We have having this twisted interpretation of Section 230. Facebook is now saying that it's going to change its privacy policies, and everyone's like, yeah, right, whatever. So I just wanted to bring you in and get your take on how this is affecting Latino communities, what the perspective is when it comes to Section 230, what we're looking at when we consider, who's going to take office, what the different scenarios are likely to be. So you have a conference coming up in December.
Yeah, you know what, you are absolutely right. There's so much going on. I think that the Trump administration is doing its part to kind of jam as much into the agenda as possible, both of the Supreme Court, both I think in Congress, and specifically when they're doing a really good job of kind of pushing this idea about Section 230 and about what they call conservative bias online. But the reality is that we know that more than half of Americans, 53%, say that they've been subjected to hateful speech online or harassment. 37% of them reported severe attacks, including sexual harassment, stalking. This is according to a recent survey by the Anti-Defamation League. So for many victims of online abuse, it had to do in response to a person's sexual orientation, their religion, their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity, or their disability, right? And I think what's important to note about online platforms is that, they've really been able to democratize information and empowered a lot of historically marginalized voices with a venue to be heard. But I think, and that's largely because of the protection of Section 230, but they've also helped to kind of normalize deeply offensive viewpoints that result in kind of swarms of attacks, often anonymous, that feed off of, tense and polarized political climate, in which kind of like inflammatory social media posts can draw attention and spread quickly, and really kind of has a very real and direct harm to Black and Brown communities. So because we know that online hate speech has a very real likelihood of translating into real life physical harm. And so when we consider kind of this idea about whether it's time to change Section 230 to adapt to the new reality of our digital economy and our digital ecosphere, it's really important that we kind of keep in mind the value that Section 230 has really had for communities of color to ensure that we can get our voices out there. For example, it's really difficult to imagine a movement like Black Lives Matter thriving online on both Twitter and Facebook without the protection of Section 230. If we just all of a sudden got rid of Section 230, which is a liability shield for online platforms like Facebook and Twitter, then what happens is that these platforms are forced to kind of make these really tough decisions about moderation. And we know that, when that's the case, platforms and companies and businesses tend to over-moderate as opposed to really kind of understanding the perspective of the people that are kind of voicing their free speech online, right? When we think about Black Lives Matter, we know that there was a very real backlash at the beginning of the movement from, predominantly, I think, white supremacists, or the extreme kind of fringe right that said that Black Lives Matter was a movement that was about violence, right, or about inciting violence, or about just everything that we know is not true about the peaceful movement to ensure that the Black lives are seen and they're heard, and that we have access to true kind of like criminal justice within our criminal justice system. So I just think that for us, at Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, we really care about these types of issues as well as other issues like privacy and broadband access. And so we've really kind of brought together, diverse stakeholders, policymakers, and digital inclusion advocates as a part of our inaugural Digital Inclusion Summit, which is happening in December. And we specifically have a conversation to talk about free speech, hate speech, misinformation, voter suppression online, and really centered it as a conversation about civil rights, digital privacy, and the future of Section 230. So we definitely encourage all of your listeners and you, of course, for you to kind of tune in to next week's hearing, or I guess this week at this point, we've all lost track of time as we're kind of working from home, to really ensure that representative voices from diverse communities are at the table and are weighing in on this issue, because we can't just get rid of Section 230 and expect the same kind of positive outcomes for our communities online. So I would just say that's the flag for everybody tuning in, and we're hoping to continue to engage in the conversation with you and other stakeholders in the tech policy arena.
And so then when it comes to access, you mentioned access briefly. What are some of the disparities that you're seeing there, and what are some of the proposals that are on the table currently?
Yeah, so, as millions of us really around the world at this point try to work, attend school, manage our health and other critical needs remotely, the pandemic has really exposed what many of us, who are digital inclusion advocates, have known for decades, right? And that's the digital divide is not just a problem, but it's a crisis. Access to digital technology has opened new domains of opportunity for some people, and also new domains of exclusion for cost-sensitive consumers, for Black or Indigenous communities of color, for rural communities, and maybe for multi-generational families who are disproportionately impacted by the digital divide and who face compounding barriers to the benefits of our 21st century economy. So when I say kind of digital inclusion, for us, it's more than just about internet access. It's a movement towards new solutions that connect every community and every home to affordable broadband, right? It's about inclusive information technologies built by and for diverse communities with diverse needs, and coupled with the digital skills necessary to stay safe online. For us at HTTP, and for me personally, digital inclusion means no one gets left out, no one gets left behind, and everyone is connected. In order to achieve that kind of that fully inclusive, tech future, we really need to ensure that, number one, we understand that it's important for us to update our broadband maps, right? To understand where the coverage gaps exist in our community, so that we can get a plan, establish some public-private partnerships to extend service and deploy broadband to those communities that continue to be, historically underserved. I think it's important for us to understand that now that basically a large portion of our lives are online, that we establish a national kind of framework to protect consumer privacy online. And I think that it's also important for us to kind of realize and push government to ensure that as we're talking about connection and digital inclusion, it's not just about access to broadband infrastructure, but also to real kind of dollars allocated to ensure that every community can develop the digital skills necessary to be safe online and to thrive online. Just because, the DMV may go online and say, now you can apply to get your license online, doesn't mean that every person is going to be able to navigate that platform, that there's information online available in your native language, right? Or that there's support services, right, that are able to help people navigate these new kind of like online platforms and get the services and the products and the experience that I think that we all want and deserve.
Alejandro Roark, Executive Director of the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, HTTP. Alejandro, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, Joe.
And that concludes episode 247. Thanks so much for joining me. If you like what we do, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Also, I guess I'll see you on the other side of tonight's results. Hang in there, everybody.
WashingTECH.